Hey, so I'm here to tell you a little bit about the Web API and how it works with .NET. This is based off the example that .NET provides. They provide a little tutorial, and I am assuming that you've already done the tutorial and that you are now kind of wondering maybe how it works a little bit. So the only difference for me in the tutorial really is that we have the application start. They have you put in some routing information, but that was an old way to do it, and the new way is that you have it this registered through here. And so we're just going to not work in the global file, and we're going to instead work within the web API config file. So here's our route. It's almost the exact same that it was previous, but it's just a better way to do it. So the important files here, we have our product, which is just a class. We won't really be looking at that anymore, just basic class. We have our product controller, which has some methods about how we're going to retrieve our stuff. And then we have our web page, which is the web page that a user would click on, and then how they would see the data. And so we'll start here. Some important parts of this is we have the page content. So we have basically a table. This is just a blank table there. And then we have a jQuery reference, and then we use jQuery to get JSON data from our API. So this is our API route currently. You see we have API products, and then it empties out our table, and then it uses this function here to fill our table with the data we get back. And so the route here comes from, the reason why we put that route there is because in this routing folder, we have our route as API controller ID. And you'll notice the squiggly brackets around there. And you'll see the ID is optional down here. But kind of one of the cool things about this is that it will take your controller name, in our case products controller, and then all you have to do is just pass in the word products here, and then it will append the word controller to it. So make sure you have controller spelled right up there, else it won't work. So if we were to just do this real quick, we would see what data we get back. So we'll just do this like we do. We should get back a table of our list of data. So here's this. And there's our data that came through. So you see we got 4 items. I also added an item. So here are 4 items that we got back. And it called this get all products to get that. You might be wondering, why is it getting this function? Like, how does it know to get this function? Well, it's assuming a get call on our page right here, get JSON, and so it's assuming a get call, and that is then taken to the controller, and then it looks for the a prefix basically, and this prefix is get. So it says, okay, I'm going to use this one because there was no parameters passed in, and it has the word get in front of it, and so that's why it returned that. On here, you see that we have an ID attribute. So as we'll see soon, is if we pass in an ID, it will go to the next get that has an ID as a parameter. And so I'm going to open up this thing called Postman now. So Postman here is a way that we can see what data we're getting back from our API. So we're going to hit our API. We got our local host with API products. If we click send, we're doing a GET request. Then we'll see this data that we get back. Pretty simple stuff. It's just hitting that URL and then getting the data back that we would expect. And it's calling this. So now let's change that to add an ID in here actually. So let's add 2. And we should get this yo-yo back. So we'll try that. And we get 2. So we get yo-yo. If we do 3, we get hammer. If we get 4, we get shovel. Sweet. So that's kind of how that works. It's basically just getting this data. And so since we passed that ID in there, then we see that data. Well, we can try it real quick on our page. So let's go here. And now if I were to add this in here, I'm going to get the yo-yo thing back, it would actually break because this is returning a list, whereas we're returning a single thing. So I'm just going to comment that out and then uncomment this code. It's basically the same. We're just getting a singular data.name, data.price. Okay. And then we're going to view this in the browser. and then this should return yo-yo when it loads. And there's yo-yo. If we were to change this to a 3, save it, and then go back out here, we would instead get hammer. So that's kind of how that data is working through there. The next thing I want to talk about is you might be like, well, how can I get a string here on the category? If I want to get all the categories, with the categories, it's returning a list. So let's change this right here. Back, we'll just undo this. So there's that. Now we're getting our list back. And let's say we just put toys in. Let's see what this returns. It doesn't return anything. And that's because it's actually breaking. So if we were to put toys in here into our Postman, which is, just hitting that API and telling us what it returns, we get a request invalid. And so that's kind of strange. We might be like, well, why is that not working like we would hope? And the thing is because it's passing into this route here, API, we pass in product as our controller, and we're trying to pass in a ID. If we were to instead do category here, and then run this, so we just changed the route on there. Then we get that yo-yo back like we would expect. And then if we were to go in here, Postman, I could show you here. And as you see, we're getting that back. So that's working great. Let's say instead I want to do hardware. Then we had 2 of those. Then we get back 2 things because we're returning that list, remember. And if I were to change this to hardware, we'd see that that list would work properly. So let's get that here real quick. And there it goes. Sweet. So the other final thing I'll talk about here is actions. So action is another one of these cool variables that we can use here. And so you see this. So we have an action. And so now what we can do, let's say that we didn't have, so this kind of knows that this is using this get here. But let's say we didn't know that. Then we could then take this here. This, just copied that. And we're just going to paste that there. And so now what we're doing is now we have our API, which is just a word we just decided. We have our controller, then we're calling an action, and then we're passing in a parameter that we want, right? And so now this should just still just work like normal here. And there we go. It returned correctly. Sweet. And we can check our Postman just for fun. This would not work because we don't have the correct format there. So if we just add that in there, then we would do that. So to summarize, ASP.NET and their web API is doing a little bit of magic with the routers, and that's kind of how that works, where it calls the controller by adding the controller and then selecting the action. If you don't specify it, it assumes like those first get, post actions, and then we can specify different parameters in there to get the data that we want on our pages. So thanks for watching, and that's the video.